On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only three people you can trust in life: your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle. Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new t-shirt.
It's your new t-shirt. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good morning and welcome to Sunday with Michael Portillo. As winter descends, warm yourself by a hearth ablaze with arts, culture, politics and world affairs. To start, I'll be joined by an excellent political panel to discuss the Chancellor's autumn statement. The headline was a national insurance cut. But how else will the statement affect you? And will the economy be boosted or hindered by the unprecedented migration figures released this week, showing that the United Kingdom population grew by almost 750,000 people last year? As the horrors of the conflict in the Middle East have consumed the media's attention, we are in danger, perhaps, of forgetting the existential battle being fought by Ukraine against Russian invaders. Russia has been launching fierce offensive in Ukraine's east to capture the town of Avdiivka, so far with little success. But Ukraine is still at a gross disadvantage in terms of hardware and manpower. We'll receive a report from the country. I took a trip to South London this week to visit the Dulwich Picture Gallery, England's oldest purpose-built public space for art. It's organised a remarkable exhibition on one of the Golden Age's titanic figures, Peter Paul Rubens, and his relationship with women. The exhibition, running over Christmas and into January, captures the sumptuous beauty of Rubens's work. Speaking of Christmas, Stefan Kyriazis will be here to tell us about some of the season's productions of Dickens's A Christmas Carol, as well as the delightful musical rendering of Roald Dahl's The Witches. All of that is to come, but first, your news headlines with Sophia Wensler.
Good morning. It's 1 minute past 11. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB newsroom. Reports say the Israel government has received the list of hostages who are expected to be released today. An official told the Times of Israel that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office are notifying the families of those loved ones who are on the list. It is the third day of a 4-day truce, which Qatar says earlier today it hopes will be extended further with the release of more abductees. Meanwhile, smoke can be seen at the Gaza border on the third day of the truce between Israel and Hamas. Hamas confirmed that the total of 340 trucks loaded with aid supplies has entered Gaza through the Rafah crossing since the truce began. 9-year-old Irish-Israeli girl Emily Hand has been reunited with her father following her release by Hamas. She is among 17 hostages released by the terrorist group after 50 days in captivity. 13 Israelis, 6 women and 7 children, along with 4 Thai nationals, were transported out of Gaza through the Rafah border crossing. Video released by Hamas shows women and children being taken into Red Cross vehicles. The IDF says the released hostages are now in Israel and are reuniting with their family while being medically assessed. A delay to the process was resolved through mediation by Egypt and Qatar. Chairman of Kibbutz Be'eri, Amit Solv, is relieved to see Emily Hand released.
Emily Hand is a closure for me because, unfortunately, I'm the one who told her father that she has been found murdered. And a week later, I'm the one who told the father that she probably captured. So it's a kind of a relief for me that she's still alive, she's here, she's with us, and I have to tell her father to give him a hug.
CEO of Safra Children's Hospital at the Sheba Medical Center, Prof. Ite Pesash, discussed the treatment of the women and children released from captivity in Gaza.
I am happy to say that despite the fact that the harsh conditions they have been under and the experience of captivity, they did not require any emergent medical intervention. We will keep them here at the Edmond Hillary Safra Children's Hospital for as long as they need and care for them, help them in their preparation of coming back to their communities.
39 Palestinians have been released from a prison in the West Bank in exchange for the Israeli hostages. Hundreds of Palestinians welcomed freed prisoners in the early hours this morning. Crowds cheered, clapped and waved flags in the streets as buses of prisoners arrived. It's understood 6 women and 33 children are among those freed prisoners in the second batch of the exchange deal. The Met Police have launched an investigation into a group of protesters who intimidated a GB News political correspondent at a pro-Palestine protest in London. Catherine Forster found shelter after being surrounded by irate demonstrators. In a post on X, the Met Police say the right of the press to freely report on protests is no less important than the right to protest itself. They should be able to do so without facing intimidation or aggression. 18 people were arrested during the pro-Palestine protests in London yesterday. And Kemi Badenoch has unveiled a £4.5 billion funding plan for British manufacturing. The Business Secretary's multi-billion-pound funding package is set to drive growth and boost investment in the UK. Car makers, aerospace companies and clean energy firms are set to benefit from the boost. The plan has been published alongside a 50 million battery strategy, which will see the UK aim to become a world leader in design and production of key technology. This is GB News across the UK, on TV, in your car, on your digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. And now it's back to Michael.
Thank you, Sophia Wensler. The government has a mountain to climb if it's to convince voters to keep it in office at the general election next year. When the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, delivered the autumn statement on Wednesday, he took full credit for the recent reduction in inflation. If inflation is in his control, it makes you wonder why he didn't take the blame for causing it. He also sought congratulations for a £10 billion national insurance cut, despite the fact that inflation is dragging so many more into income tax and into higher rates of tax. Even if the Conservatives salvaged some credibility on the economy, the annual migration figures were another blow to a party pledged to control the flow. The Office for National Statistics revealed that the United Kingdom population grew by 745,000 in 2022. I'm joined by economist Vicky Price, Alice Denby, who is the editor of CapEx, and financial columnist at the Daily Telegraph, Matthew Lynn. Welcome, all three, to GB News. Thank you for coming in on a Sunday morning. Vicky, the two main parties are talking about the need for growth in the economy. Did you get the feeling that the national insurance cut, for example, and the changes to business taxation could help to grow the economy?
The business taxation one, perhaps over the longer term. But in terms of the short-term change that we might see, very little. Even when you look at the Office of Budget Responsibilities calculations, they say somewhere in one little sentence that all the demand side measures that were in the autumn statement probably will only increase GDP by 0.1% over the sort of medium to long term, which is very, very small. So what they're relying on is the supply side. So the cut in national insurance contributions will do very, very little, except perhaps boost consumer confidence a little bit. And we've seen already a bit of a change happening because the November data suggested that the consumer is slightly more confident now going out and spending a little bit more. But that's because of Christmas, one assumes, rather than because of the national insurance contributions cut, it was going to make very little difference to their overall packages because after tax, because they have seen a huge increase in the tax take anyway.
Your rather minimalist description of what's happened then, does that mean also that we needn't worry about the inflationary impact of those changes?
Yes, there is a small chance that the Bank of England will be a little bit more cautious than they otherwise would when they decide next what to do. For the moment anyway, they're going to say in the next meeting, I'm suggesting that they're not going to be reducing rates for a while. They'll pause again. What they have been trying to warn everyone is that they are on top of the whole issue. They're not going to let inflation, come up again. I think what is more significant for the bank is not so much the cut in the national insurance contribution, the fact that people might go out and spend a little bit more, which is unlikely to make a big difference. It's the fact that energy costs are going up again. So we've just had, a day after the autumn statement, more or less a day, I think it was last week, this announcement of this increase in the energy cap, which means that people are going to be paying 5% more than they do at present. And that almost offsets the 7% cut that they saw in the previous calculation. So it's not going to cheer many people. And of course, what it means is that with winter, those who have big homes and use quite a lot of energy, doesn't necessarily have to be big homes, but those who need to use a lot of energy are going to find themselves worse off again.
Matthew, do you believe that the Chancellor made the right budget judgment, that he made the right decision about how much to relax? And given the small amount of manoeuvre that he had, do you think he made good use of that room?
Short answer, probably no. I mean, I think if you step back a little bit, it's just a very bizarre system. And what he should have been doing is reflecting a little bit on the mistakes which Hunt as Chancellor and Rishi Sunak as Prime Minister made. Because it's weird, isn't it? If you rewind 12 months, we're all being told, we've got to put up taxes a lot. We've got to put up taxes by this much. Doesn't matter how much damage it does. And then only 12 months later, we're saying, we've got 10, 12, 15 billion we can give back. Well, it would have been better if you'd realised that a year ago. The economy doesn't change that dramatically and hadn't put up taxes so much in the first place. So I think the first thing he should have done really was to reflect a little bit on that. He's probably not going to win the next election anyway, so you might as well forget about that and actually make some decent long-term decisions and think, actually, we've got to do something about this kind of, weird outsourced architecture where we let people like the OBR say, you've got to put up taxes all this much, you've got to put up corporation tax from 19 to 25, and then a year later you say to companies, hang on, you can deduct 10 billion off it. It'd be better if you'd actually said, this is what the next 4 or 5 years look like, make a judgment about it and have a more stable and more competitive tax regime.
I'm so pleased you said this because I think you put your finger on a silliness. I mean, to be told at one time you got 10 billion short and the next year that you got 10 billion to spend or whatever. I mean, these are such tiny sums by comparison with the economy overall. And yet these judgments are taken as though they were some way, sacred or indeed correct. They're constantly being revised. And politicians constructed some of these structures because they thought the politicians themselves, ironically, are not trusted by the people, that you have to have people who are not elected because they'll be trusted more than those who are elected. So they construct things like the OBR to sort of stand in judgment over them. You think we might be able to sweep some of that away, do you?
I think we can. You just put it even better than I did, Michael. Thank you very much. Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, the best. I mean, one of the things, you know, Jeremy Hunt could have done for the economy would actually be say to the OBR, you know, look, these forecasts aren't good enough. I can't really see the point. We're going to save 300 or 400k a year just by closing that down and going back to a system where the Chancellor and the Prime Minister with their officials from the Treasury take some long-term decisions, because you know the constant chopping and changing. And I think you do have to. I mean, he did some good stuff in the autumn statement. Full expensing, he gave some, you know, and some of the tax cuts. You know, that was good.
Full expensing is the business tax change.
Absolutely. And as Vicky was saying, it will help a little bit at the margin. But you should reflect on the damage that the tax rises did. You know, you had a big rise in corporation tax, some investment. There'll be some factories that didn't go built. There'll be some warehouses that didn't get set up, and the increase in marginal tax rates with the freezing of thresholds. You know, there'll be some people who decided it wasn't worth doing over time. That you know, there'll be some two parents with two children who will decide, oh, it's not worth one of us going out to work. And so we did quite a lot of damage with the tax rises a year ago. And just the fact that you've sort of tweaked it a little bit and undone a little bit of the damage doesn't really make up for it.
Alice, very sorry to keep you waiting. Do you get the feeling that maybe the Chancellor had one success in as much as he diverted the conversation onto whether the cuts in national insurance contributions were a good thing or enough or whatever, whereas actually the overall picture, as I said in my introduction, is that personal taxation is rising because of the terrific impact of inflation, which is dragging people into income tax and dragging people into higher rates of income tax.
Yes, absolutely. I think the real problem that this government is going to have coming the next election is it can say that it's cut taxes, but nobody is going to feel better off when they are, as you say, because of inflation, paying more tax in real terms. So, I mean, I think, as others said, there were some positive things in this budget. I do think that the full expensing is a huge change to how businesses can invest in this country. And Labour has said that they're going to stick with it. So that is a permanent change, might make a big difference. But then, as Matthew was saying, businesses have also been faced with so much uncertainty, with windfall taxes, with corporation tax going up. So, yeah, I think the overall picture is, you know, I think he did some good things on Wednesday, but the overall picture is still low growth, people feeling poorer, inflation still going up, and a pretty miserable state for the country to be in.
I think I read a hint somewhere, presumably fed into the press, that there might be an election pledge, or possibly even something in a budget before the election, to do something about indexing the thresholds, which is what is causing so many people to be drawn into tax and into the higher rates of tax. I mean, that's a very expensive thing to do. Did you give any credibility to that hint, that leak?
Well, I mean, I think it would be a good thing to do, but as you say, I mean, the whole reason why the Chancellor was able to make these tax cuts is because he's getting so much revenue in from these frozen thresholds. So it's all a sort of bit of a kind of... There's a real lack of accountability, I think, here, and it goes to what Matthew was saying about OBR forecasts and sort of outsourcing all these decision-makings. I mean, you see this kind of circular buck passing when it comes to inflation as well. You know, Rishi Sunak's there taking the credit for halving it when it's not his job to control inflation. No. It's the Bank of England's job, and the Bank of England failed to see the inflation crisis coming and actively contributed to it by printing money through quantitative easing. So I think there are some real structural problems that have really embedded low growth in this country.
It was the responsibility of the Chancellor of the Exchequer to hold the Governor of the Bank of England to account, and at the time that it mattered, the Chancellor was Rishi Sunak. Vicky, do you mind if we turn to migration figures? Do you get the impression that the government has a master plan? You know, we're going to have, let's say they don't know exactly, but we're going to have more than 600,000 new people coming into the country. Therefore, we must plan for the right number of schools, the right number of hospitals, the right number of transport services, the right number of houses. Do you get the impression that that's how it's done?
No. What did happen, of course, over the last year, so those are figures up to June 2023, so it was just a year over 22. And where, of course, we had loads of Ukrainians coming, loads of people from Hong Kong coming, and students seem to still want to come. So if you exclude quite a lot of, well, the vast majority of those, then you end up with a considerably smaller number.
Yes.
So you get
and that's the government's case, by the way.
Which is, it's absolutely true. There is no reason why the headline data has to include students, for example. We are a country where loads of people want to come and study in. And that is a huge export for us. So big earner. So it should be good news rather than worrying about this.
But presumably the comparison of the number between one year and the next is valid because students are always in there.
Yes, well, perhaps. But I mean, you're quite right. The figures, nevertheless, look big So if you add the students to what happened with people from Ukraine and people also from Hong Kong, then you get a very large figure. But the interesting thing is that where a lot of the gaps are is in the National Health Service and in the care system. A lot of the people who are coming...
The employment gaps, yes.
Yes, the employment gaps.
Jobs.
A lot of people come to that. The percentage that comes to business is considerably... Well, it's really quite small. And it is because the costs are very high, this new system that we got at present. And so it's really the National Health Service that needs to be sorted out before we can look at those numbers going down.
Matthew, what was your reaction? And the point that I raised as to whether any of this is planned for.
No, I mean, quite clearly, it's absolutely not planned for. I mean, it's evidently crazy. I mean, you can have a debate, and we can have a debate now about whether it should be 600, 700,000 people coming into the country every year. But if it is that, then you've got to have houses, for example. We're a country that has basically stopped building new homes, and doesn't show any signs of changing that. And, the Labour Party and the Lib Dems seem even more opposed to building any new homes anywhere than even the Conservatives are. So, a rough estimate, you probably need 200, on those figures, you need 200,000 new homes a year on top of the existing demand. They're just not there. You need, maybe a couple of new nuclear power stations to provide the electricity. Are we going to build 2 new nuclear power stations this year? Of course not. So, I mean, that's the first point, that it's, it's just a mess. If you are going to have those numbers, and it's debatable whether you should have those kind of numbers, then you have to provide the infrastructure. But I think that, the more interesting debate is, do you need those kind of numbers? Because I think, in the last 20 years, the UK is... We've been told for a long time that immigration is good for the economy, and to some level it definitely is. There's absolutely no question that at some level it is. But we've tested to destruction the idea that it always and everywhere promotes economic growth.
Alice, we've almost kept politics out of it, but would you like to make a political assessment of the importance of this number? Is this quite a blow to the Conservatives, do you think?
It's a huge blow to the Conservatives, and put it in context, it's the population equivalent of a city the size of Birmingham arriving over 2 years. It's a huge number, and of course this is a government who's promised continually to bring the numbers down. So, I mean, of course, it's devastating to people's trust in the Conservatives. But I think we were talking about this wasn't planned for. I mean, these people have come here legitimately under a visa scheme that was deliberately designed by the government, deliberately very generous to international students, because that's how we're funding our universities.
The post-Brexit scheme.
Exactly. This is, we took back control, and this is what it looks like. Those are the kind of numbers that a points-based system is yielding. So I do think we need to look again at this system. I think Matthew's absolutely right that the idea that immigration is always good for growth in the economy isn't quite true. If international students are bringing over dependents and they're able to stay for 2 years after completing their course without having to seek work, then that's clearly not really contributing to the economy. So I think there's lots of things that we could do to bring these numbers down. But I think, overall, many people voted in 2019 on a promise that overall numbers would come down, and that's not happening.
Well, I'm grateful to the three of you for a typically well-informed debate. Thank you so much. That's Matthew Lynn, Vicky Price and Alice Denby. After the break, we'll be crossing to Ukraine, where war reporter David Patrikarakos will describe the extraordinary ferocity of Russia's attacks in the east. And I'll be asking, are we in danger of forgetting this European war?
Hello there, I'm Greg Dewhurst and welcome to your latest GB News forecast. It's largely cloudy across the UK today. We see outbreaks of rain, a lot of it light, but pushing eastwards and still feeling quite cold. And looking at the bigger picture, low pressure dominates our weather pattern at the moment. As this low pulls away through next week, we see cold northerly wind redeveloping, increasing risk of some hill snow later on in the week. We do have some sunshine this afternoon across parts of Scotland, initially across eastern England, but generally turning cloudy for most. Outbreaks of rain slowly pushing in from the Atlantic. Largely light, some drizzly patches too, but a cold feeling day, particularly in the east, 4 or 5 degrees. Slightly less cold in the west with some milder air moving in here, but it doesn't hang around too long. Frost across parts of Scotland for a time before a weak weather front pushes southwards, but a lot of cloud. Outbreaks of rain across England, Wales and Northern Ireland means generally a frost-free night, though the cloud quite low, so it'd be quite murky in places. And that rain turning heavy, so generally frost-free for most, just the glens of Scotland seeing a patchy frost into Monday morning. A grey start for many. Outbreaks of patchy rain as this low pressure slowly pushes south and eastwards. It turns brighter from the northwest. Sunny spells western Scotland, Northern Ireland, later on some northwestern parts of England and Wales. Staying gloomy and grey in the east, in particular heavy showers in the northeast. Temperatures a little milder but turning colder as the day progresses.
is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests, and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. While the attention of the global media is fixed on Israel's war against Hamas in Gaza, the Russian invasion of Ukraine has slipped down the list of priorities. Yet the scale of death and destruction may be greater now than ever before as Russia throws waves of young soldiers into ferocious offensives around the eastern town of Avdiivka. The Ukrainians are so far holding them back, but there's concern that Western military supplies are too few and are taking too long to arrive. War reporter David Patrikarakos is in Ukraine and joins us now to report on what's going on. David, welcome. President Zelensky was fighting against the use of the word stalemate by his military, but I'm afraid stalemate is a pretty good word to describe what's going on, isn't it?
Yeah, unfortunately it is. Since the all-out invasion of Ukraine last February, I've been in and out of the country. I've been to all three fronts. And what I'm seeing now is, on the front lines, very much a stalemate for various reasons. I would point out, though, that it's a stalemate in which Russia is now doing everything it can to push the Ukrainians back. I came back from the south into Kiev yesterday morning and was greeted by the biggest drone attack that Kiev has experienced since the beginning of the war. Swarms and swarms of Iranian Shahed drones attacked and struck the city. So it is a stalemate in which Russia is doing everything it can to push its advantage and to kill as many Ukrainians as possible.
Is it also the case, though, that lots of Russians are dying? I was talking there about waves of young soldiers being sent in. I mean, people now make the comparison with the trenches of the Great War. Are the Russians losing rather large numbers of inexperienced soldiers in this process?
Absolutely. Look, on the front, the Ukrainian soldiers call them meat waves. The Russians send wave after wave of human meat, essentially. But this, Michael, as you know better than most, is the gift of autocracy. It's the gift of being a dictator. Russia can send thousands and thousands of young soldiers, young conscripts to their deaths, and there will be no blowback. Putin is not accountable to his people. No one's going to vote him out. And unfortunately, in the end, that kind of mass becomes a quality in and of itself, especially since the Ukrainians are also losing men in a democracy where every death is a political cost as well as a tragedy. So yes, the Russians are losing lots of men, but unfortunately they can afford to, and they just keep coming and coming and coming.
Let's turn to the international political situation. It appears that there is now a policy which has been dreamed up in Washington and Berlin, which is to keep the Ukrainians on a short leash, that is to say, to supply them with weapons that enable them to continue to mount a defence, but not weapons that would enable them to win a victory, with a view to taking them to the negotiating table. Is that more or less how you read it?
So I'm aware of this report doing the rounds in Berlin. There has been doubt cast on it. But look, I have to tell you again, since the beginning of the all-out invasion, you know, delivery after delivery of weapons, it's been enough to stem the tide, to keep the Russians pushed back, but not enough to push forward and totally win the war. And it's not just the amount, it's the timing. You know, if the Ukrainians had got what they wanted when they asked, they might have been in a better position. Look, from everything I hear on the ground and also in various capitals, European and in America that I visit, you know, it is politically unacceptable for Zelensky to talk about negotiation. Imagine if it was a British Prime Minister. What do you do, Michael? Do you say, OK, we'll give you Manchester and Leeds? You can't say it. It's politically impermissible. But I think there is a realization that the Russians cannot be pushed out of everywhere they've occupied, especially areas they've occupied for a decade, Donetsk and Luhansk. So it's about what can you do in the interim. Right now, it's rainy. You know, the snow hasn't yet properly fallen. It's boggy. It's hard to fight. The armor can't really move, but that will freeze. You know, the conditions will freeze, and then we'll start to get going again in the dead of winter. But right now, I think unspoken, there is a desire for some kind of true ceasefire to be reached. The Ukrainians are resisting with everything they can, and if we'll just see what happens when the F-16s come in, maybe something will happen. But right now, it's very much a stalemate, and everybody here is looking to the US elections. That's what they're scared of. Yes.
You made the parallel with, I think you said Manchester and Leeds. I mean, the thing that worries me is the parallel with the Munich Agreement of 1938. It's all very well, these great powers, which today are Germany, the United States, Britain, to some extent, decreeing that Ukraine should give up territory to Russia. It's not something that I feel very comfortable about, I must say.
No, I agree. Look, and I think the Munich Agreement is quite interesting because I've said this from the very beginning. If Ukraine had folded after 3 days, as Putin's lickspittles told him it would, he would be in Moldova and Georgia by now, because why wouldn't he? There is this belief in the Kremlin, in Russia, and you see it talked about a lot, that the West is going to get bored, the West is going to lose concentration, the West will abandon Ukraine, as it did Iraq, as it did Afghanistan. All they have to do is wait. And if we prove them right, that is very, very worrying. I understand people in Britain thinking, well, why should we be sending money to Ukraine, sending equipment? We need schools and hospitals. And that's completely true. But if we don't hold the line now, we're going to have to put more money in later, and that is fewer schools and hospitals. I said this, I wrote this, and I believe it to be true. There is, you know, a Western front now that runs from Kiev, in a sense, all the way to Gaza. We have a conglomeration of enemies, Russia, China, Iran, who, to call them an axis actually is overblown. They don't have much in common, but they are united by one thing, to try and punch holes in the Western-led status quo wherever they see them. This is why the war in Ukraine is much more than just Ukraine and Russia. It really is about, I think, in key regards, the future of the West. And it is critical that after all this time and all this money and all this effort, we don't abandon them now, because it will embolden Russia and China and Iran. I promise you that.
Extraordinary, given what you say, that they're in fear of the election in the United States because there could easily be a huge change of policy in Washington. Thank you very much, David Patrick Caracas. Peter Paul Rubens was a Flemish artist and diplomat who mingled in the highest circles of European society in the 17th century. His paintings of women are famous and have generally been thought of as voluptuous nudes typical of the age of Baroque. A wonderful new exhibition in South London challenges that assumption, showing how the women in Rubens's life were variously his model, inspiration or patroness. The Dulwich Picture Gallery was the first purpose-built public art gallery in England when it opened in 1811. And the collection centred on the age of Baroque and featured 9 works by Peter Paul Rubens, the artist who was knighted by both King Philip IV of Spain and King Charles I of England. Having those items gave Dulwich the status to borrow from great collections to mount a world-class exhibition on Rubens and women. Jennifer, give me a thumbnail sketch of Peter Paul Rubens, please.
For me, Rubens is one of the greatest artists who ever lived. He was so talented, he worked incredibly hard, and he made the most of what he had at his disposal, his contacts and his skill. So for that reason, he's my favourite.
And why do you like his paintings?
They sing, and there is so much variety with Rubens' paintings. He responds to what is needed in the moment, whether he's painting a portrait or a great mythological picture. He really knows how to draw out storytelling and to listen to what's needed.
He moved around Europe at the highest levels of society with royal patrons and making portraits of royal personages.
Yes, he was very good with people. You can tell that in the way that he paints. And in this exhibition here at Dulwich Picture Gallery, we're drawing out his relationship with women. And actually what we realise is that paintings that Rubens made weren't of women, they were often for women. His great patron was the Archduchess Isabella, and she sent him as a diplomat to the English court to broker peace between England and Spain. And how clever that was, because King Charles I loved, first and foremost, art. So Rubens was the leading artist of his day, and Archduchess Isabella sends him to broker peace with Charles I.
So what is it in this exhibition that tells a different story from what we've assumed in the past? Why are you saying that his relationship with women is different from what we thought?
So what we've perceived at the gallery is that there is a certain fear of Rubens's depictions of women, the sense that there are lots of oversized, naked women, and that can be overpowering, sometimes off-putting. And so what we've done is carefully selected the best of the best, with a variety of images, depictions of different women, whether they're religious paintings or portraits or mythologies, and we've pulled them together in this exhibition to show the breadth of his work and to show that sensitivity, and it really shines a different light on this extraordinary artist.
Rubens was married twice, I think. The first wife was Isabella. Does she feature in the paintings?
Oh, she does, and in the first room we have a portrait of her from the Uffizi in Florence, and she looks so cheeky and wonderful in that painting, and we've hung it alongside a portrait of their daughter, Clara Serena, and the likeness between mother and daughter is really striking.
Clara Serena died very young, and then indeed Isabella died. There was lots of tragedy in that part of Rubens's life.
Yes, there was. I mean, the 17th century, it's always worth remembering what a difficult time that was, and Europe was ravaged by war, but also plague. And so Isabella died from the plague, and Rubens writes so beautifully in his letters about his feelings and his grief, and he thought that he would never get over the loss of Isabella because he loved her so. And then one of his friends wrote to him when Clara Serena had died, when she was only 12 years old, and wrote in condolence to Rubens at the loss of such a precious daughter.
And yet, at the age of 53, he marries for a second time. He marries Hélène, who is 16 years old.
Yes, again, we remember the 17th century was a very different time, but he also was very careful. I think Rubens had seen so much, and he knew how short life could be. And his great patron, the Archduchess, was saying maybe he should marry very well, marry an English gentlewoman and the aristocracy, and it would help with all these political negotiations. And instead, Rubens writes in his letters that he cannot do that, and instead he marries the most beautiful woman in Antwerp. And the last decade of his life, she inspired him. Every female face he paints from 1630 through to his death in 1640 looks like Helena Formant. And you get that radiating sense of love, but also that prolific period. He decides to retire from his public duties. They buy a house in the countryside, Het Steen, a country retreat, and he paints landscape paintings. It's as if he's just really making the most of his time and of his love as a father, as a husband, and he just does what he loves best. He paints pictures that express how he's feeling.
I would not necessarily have thought that this was a period when great respect would be shown to women. But I think you're implying that Rubens did show great respect.
And I think we can learn a lot about history through art. When we look at Rubens' paintings, we can tell that he's really looking, that he's responding to the personalities that he is painting. Whether that's intelligence or vanity, he pulls it all together. And that in itself is an act of respect. But Rubens would not have had the success that he had were it not for the women in his life. Not only his wives who inspired him, but also his great patrons, Marie de Medici, the Archduchess Isabel. They changed his career because they saw his talent, they gave him the opportunities, but it was for Rubens to seize those.
And are the women in his paintings extras or are they heroes?
Absolutely heroes. There's one little painting we have from Kassel that shows the flight into Egypt. And in that painting, it is the Virgin Mary who really shines as the hero of the moment. Her husband, Joseph, is running away in fear, and he's sort of hiding and just seems as if he's cowed by life. But Mary is completely calm and in control of the moment. And we see that again and again. Rubens allows his female figures to be the heroes of the stories that he tells.
He lived through a period of great religious struggle internally and between nations, and he was part of the Counter-Reformation movement. How did that affect his paintings?
It was strangely of benefit to him because as a Catholic, he gained many commissions for Catholic churches who wanted to fill the greatest churches of the southern Netherlands with grand altarpieces. So in a way, commercially for him, it was a very good thing. His faith was important to him too. And so you can see the way that he really thinks about the theology. His paintings are very intelligent, but also they work as ways in for people to pray in front of them. There's a beautiful Holy Family in this exhibition where he paints the Virgin Mary and the Christ Child. It's our Christmas card at the gallery this year. And the Virgin Mary is a portrait of his first wife, Isabel. And the child, the Christ Child, is their son, Nicholas.
You have drawn paintings here from across the world, from some of the greatest galleries on the face of the planet. How is the Dulwich Picture Gallery able to do that?
It's the strength of our collection. We have in our collection some superb oil sketches by Rubens. And so this exhibition is an opportunity to showcase them. For instance, we have a sketch that he made in the late 1620s for a huge commission for a series of paintings that were being sent to Madrid. And for the first time since 1628, that oil sketch from our collection is united with the great finished painting from the Prado in Madrid. So I think it's the strength of our collection and also the focus that we have on our exhibitions here and our reputation for our exhibitions really doing something interesting, and that unlocks great loans.
Please complete this sentence. Over the Christmas period, I should go and visit the Rubens exhibition at the Dulwich Picture Gallery because...
Because there's nowhere better to be if I want to enjoy great art in the most beautiful setting.
I rather agree with that. I was talking to Jennifer Scott at the Dulwich Picture Gallery, and Rubens and Women is an exhibition that runs all the way through December and into January. You're watching Sunday with Michael Portillo on GB News, Britain's news channel, and after the break, Stefan Kyriazis will send a ghostly chill around the studio as he glides through some of this season's productions of A Christmas Carol.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only three people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this? It's my new teeth. It's your new teeth.
I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this?
Are you rethinking this policy?
Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. The Witches by Roald Dahl has been transformed into a musical for the National Theatre. And to review it, I'm joined by the darling of the theatre world, Stefan Kyriazis. No, it's really bad, I agree. Did you enjoy The Witches?
I absolutely loved The Witches. I really, really did. And we've already had this gold standard Tim Minchin adaptation of Matilda. And this pretty much matches that level of incorporating puns and pathos. It honours Dahl's kind of darkness, maybe not quite as much as I would have liked, but oh my goodness, it's fun. It's absolutely glorious. It's the story of a boy who's quickly orphaned early on, so Dahl, as always, goes in heavy with very adult themes, but, you know, the best children's literature and fairy tales is filled with that. And it's so beautifully done. And I have to say, everyone has been talking about this. There are 2 child actors in this that are an absolute sensation. And there are 3 rotating casts. And the PR has assured me that everybody's excellent. But the 2 I saw, the young one, Bertie Kaplan, that plays Luke, in the book, he's just the boy, aged up to about 10 and a half and ready to be a grown-up. And he has this fabulous show-stopping song, bags of charm. He's like a young Tom Holland. And then we have the terrible loss of his parents. And this kid has just charmed us, delighted us. You're like, I want to hang out with you. And then he's got these wells of emotion underneath. It's a staggering performance.
Gosh.
And Sally Ann Triplett, that plays his Norwegian gran that comes in chomping on cigars with a ceramic gnome as her best friend, as you do, she tells him there are witches everywhere. So it's ripping away a child's sense of security. He's got to be afraid of stuff. He's lost his parents. She's very old. She has a heart attack early on. There's the most beautiful song they both sing, the Heartbeat Duet, about the fear and loss and being abandoned. It's all in there. And then it's fun. It's so much fun. I've never heard so much cheering in my life. And I looked around, and the kids are all like this, kind of totally engaged. But there were kind of an adult couple next to me, and the older guy was beaming all the way through. And the second boy is marvellously called Kian Eagle Service, and he is as splendid as his name. And he plays Bruno, the spoilt, rich little glutton boy. And he is this Lothario charmer at 10 and a half. Like, hello, my darling. May I say how lovely you look today? Do you possibly have any sweets? And this sort of thing. And then does this huge kind of Busby Berkeley show-stopping number, Bruno Suite number, that builds and builds. I thought the roof would come off the National Theatre at the end of him.
Good heaven.
So it's glorious and splendid.
And they're fighting the Grand Witch, is that right?
Yes, the Grand High Witch, played by Catherine Kingsley, and she's giving us a bit of garbo. So long, flowing, sort of ermine trimmed and whatever. And she gives us a glorious song, Wouldn't It Be Nice, which is sung to the parents. Wouldn't it be nice if we didn't have any children? Imagine what your lives would be. And it's just glorious. And the witches are all brilliant. They're very funny and spiky. Perhaps not quite as scary, but there's there's a moment of terror. I can't spoil it, involving a mobile phone. That shot fear through sweaty adults in the audience. It's geniusly done, fabulously staged, marvellous rotating, huge stages, tons of humour for adults sneaked in amongst the lyrics.
My goodness, this sounds like a complete
I loved it.
five-star review.
And it's building. I think it's early days, but I'm really looking forward. And I think this
it's at the Olivier, which is part of the National Theatre on the South Bank.
It's running until the 27th of January.
Right.
And I think this is going to become an established, returning powerhouse of a show, and I love it.
Oh, marvellous.
Yes.
Now, we've also got Dickens's A Christmas Carol, and we've got two versions of this.
We do. Well, we have... the whole country is becoming awash with Christmas carols, like Panto. We've got a very, very lovely one at the Old Vic, which I am very, very fond of. I think we've got a little clip just to give you a little feeling of the atmosphere.
Gosh, that looks pretty good as well.
It's
and look at all those five-star reviews.
Well, I was in amongst those ones. And, I mean, that is just such a tiny taster. You get snowed on in the audience, which is bliss. Little messy, but bliss. But you get mince pies wafting. You're offered mince pies as you come in. It's everything you want. The cast are amazing, little bell ringers, and they can do complete harmonies and beautiful songs with that. These carols and the original score that floats through it, they hang on the air all around you, and the cast pop up in the aisles next to you, in the balconies, and things like in the Bleak Midwinter or Coventry Carol, they just float on the air, and it's like a chill, cool breath. You hold your breath during it. Great big catwalk stage through the middle of the stalls as well, so it's all around you. It's hugely atmospheric. It's very traditional in terms of the visuals. Not a lot of sets because we're all around the action. But marvellous moments like Jacob Marley coming in. He drags 30 feet of huge chains all the way down that catwalk. The ghosts are marvellously done, and it's a very, very pared down. It's about the character and the journey, so not so much about the effects. Huge atmosphere. Every year is a different actor. This is now becoming this repeat show that is a must-see. It sells very heavily. It's glorious. It won awards on Broadway. This year we've got Christopher Eccleston as Scrooge, and he's doing a very posh accent, which is not what we expect from him, and he's really committed to this. He's committed to the misanthrope, the grumpiness, and then it's this journey of a man Yes, it's about, Dickens was very motivated by wanting to help the poor and possibly in a very paternalistic way, but that's one of the big themes. But for me, it's so much about your past, regrets, what could have been. And every time there is a moment where the Scrooge is with his younger self, who is happy and in love, but has also been awfully bullied by a father that ruined them, which is why he's such a miser, and lost his sister. So this boy is doing all this stuff, and the older Scrooge is with him, and he just says, I don't want you to grow up to be me. It's beautiful. It's heartbreaking and beautiful and glorious.
Have you any enthusiasm left for the other production of A Christmas Carol?
I have always boundless enthusiasm when it's merited. Yeah, this one is the Mark Gatiss adaptation. It's created by the Nottingham Playhouse. 2021, it did there and Alexandra Palace. It's done the same again this year. It's now about to open officially at Alexandra Palace. And this one, you have to remember that the original book was subtitled being a story about ghosts, or a Christmas story about ghosts, something like that. So Gatiss loves the Gothic and the sort of darker side of things. That's very much who he is. So this is much more dark and mysterious. We have sort of ghosts flying overhead, lots of projections. It's quite creepy. Marvellous sets again. And Alexandra Palace in particular, it is a grand old, not horribly faded, but you get a sense of history when you're there. You can imagine the creaking old times. So it's beautiful again. This time we've got Keith Allen as Scrooge. I've seen mixed things, but myself and a dear friend that saw it as well, she absolutely loved it and thought, again, for someone that's known as a comedian more than anything, he committed to that role. Deeply moving journey. Again, I can't spoil it. There's a glorious twist at the end, so something new. So again, absolutely delightful. But there are shows going on everywhere across the country.
That's fantastic guidance, I think, for your Christmas viewing. Thank you very much. To Stefan Kyriazis, you'll be back next week, and we're going to be talking about the House of Bernarda Alba, which is a García Lorca play at the Littleton Theatre, which is also the National. Well, that's it for the first hour of the programme. There's lots more to come in just a few minutes, including a sampling of Christmas cookies. I'll be back at noon.
Hello there, I'm Greg Dewhurst and welcome to your latest GB News forecast. It's largely cloudy across the UK today. We see outbreaks of rain, a lot of it light but pushing eastwards and still feeling quite cold. And looking at the bigger picture, low pressure dominates our weather pattern at the moment. As this low pulls away through next week, we see cold northerly wind redeveloping, increasing risk of some hill snow later on in the week. We do have some sunshine this afternoon across parts of Scotland, initially across eastern England, but generally turning cloudy for most. Outbreaks of rain slowly pushing in from the Atlantic. Largely light, some drizzly patches too, but a cold feeling day, particularly in the east, 4 or 5 degrees. Slightly less cold in the west with some milder air moving in here, but it doesn't hang around too long. Frost across parts of Scotland for a time before a weak weather front pushes southwards, but a lot of cloud. Outbreaks of rain across England, Wales and Northern Ireland means generally a frost-free night, though the cloud quite low, so it'd be quite murky in places. And that rain turning heavy, so generally frost-free for most, just the glens of Scotland seeing a patchy frost into Monday morning. A grey start for many. Outbreaks of patchy rain as this low pressure slowly pushes south and eastwards. It turns brighter from the northwest. Sunny spells, western Scotland, Northern Ireland, later on some northwestern parts of England and Wales. Staying gloomy and grey in the east, in particular heavy showers in the northeast. Temperatures a little milder but turning colder as the day progresses.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my new show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m, where real people get to meet those in power and hold them to account. Every week, we'll be hearing your views from up and down the country in the real world. Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello and welcome back to Sunday with Michael Portillo. Ease into Sunday afternoon with sips of arts, culture and world affairs. I'll start with history in the second hour as the government publishes a white paper asserting that Britain must acknowledge its past in the provision of foreign aid. Rishi Sunak is promising to put foreign aid at the heart of Britain's foreign policy. Does this imply that aid money is atonement for British imperialism or the slave trade? Are they reparations by the back door? I'll debate that with two historians. Across the North Sea, the Dutch were surprised to find the radical right-wing politician Geert Wilders had won the most seats in the general election. Whether Wilders, who's known for his hardline rhetoric on Islam and migration, will become Prime Minister is yet to be settled. Does his strong performance suggest that right-wing populism is on the rise in Europe? Matt Goodwin will be here to offer his thoughts. Another populist on another continent has sparked another controversy. Argentina's new president-elect has made clear that he will assert his country's claim over the Falkland Islands whilst ruling out military action. It's an uncomfortable reminder for the Falkland Islanders that Argentina is not relinquishing its claim. I'll speak to one of the island's legislators. Italy concluded its biggest mafia trial in 30 years this week, convicting and sentencing some 200 people. The organisation that they belong to is not well known outside Italy. 'Ndrangheta has evolved into perhaps the largest criminal enterprise in the world. An expert will tell us more about it. And as Christmas approaches, a culinary debate looms over the merit of the mince pie. Some people love them, some hate them. I'll be joined by an innovative businesswoman who has found a way to make even the most ardent sceptic think again. All that to come after your news headlines with Sophia Wensler.
Good afternoon, it's 2 minutes past 12. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB newsroom. Reports say the Israel government has received the list of hostages who are expected to be released today. An official told the Times of Israel that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office are notifying the families whose loved ones are on the list. It is as the third day of a 4-day truce, which Qatar says earlier today it hopes will be extended further with the release of more abductees. Meanwhile, smoke can be seen at the Gaza border on the third day of the truce between Israel and Hamas. Hamas confirmed that a total of 340 trucks loaded with aid supplies has entered Gaza through the Rafah crossing since the truce began. 9-year-old Irish-Israeli girl Emily Hand has been reunited with her father following the release by Hamas. She is among 17 hostages released by the terrorist group after 50 days in captivity. 13 Israelis, 6 women and 7 children, along with 4 Thai nationals, were transported out of Gaza through the Rafah border crossing. Video released by Hamas shows women and children being taken into Red Cross vehicles. The IDF says the released hostages are now in Israel and are reuniting with their family while being medically assessed. A delay to the process was resolved through mediation by Egypt and Qatar. Chairman of Kibbutz Be'eri, Amit Solv, is relieved to see Emily Hand released.
Emily Hand is a closure for me because, unfortunately, I'm the one who told her father that she has been found murdered. And a week later, I'm the one who told the father that she probably captured. So it's a kind of a relief for me that she's still alive, she's here, she's with us, and I have to tell his father to give him a hug.
CEO of Safra Children's Hospital at the Sheba Medical Center, Professor Itai Pasak, discussed the treatment of the women and children being released from captivity in Gaza.
I am happy to say that despite the fact that the harsh conditions they have been under and the experience of captivity, they did not require any emergent medical intervention. We will keep them here at the Edmond Hillary Safra Children's Hospital for as long as they need and care for them, help them in their preparation of coming back to their communities.
39 Palestinians have been released from the prison in the West Bank in exchange for the Israeli hostages. Hundreds of Palestinians welcomed the freed prisoners in the early hours this morning. Crowds cheered, clapped and waved flags in the streets as buses of prisoners arrived. It's understood 6 women and 33 children are among the freed prisoners in the second batch of the exchange deal. Labour MP Steve McCabe told GB News he would like to see a 2-state solution.
I want to see a free Palestine as well. It's a Labour Friends of Israel objective. I want a 2-state solution. I want to see both the Israeli people living in safety and security and the Palestinian people in a free state living in safety and security. But you can't do that when part of the potential Palestinian state is being dominated by a terrorist organisation. It's absurd.
The Met Police have launched an investigation into a group of protesters who intimidated a GB News political correspondent at a pro-Palestine protest in London. Catherine Forster found shelter after being surrounded by irate demonstrators. In a post on X, the Met Police say the right of the press to freely report on protests is no less important than the right to protest itself. They should be able to do so without facing intimidation or aggression. Meanwhile, 18 people were arrested during the pro-Palestine protests in London yesterday. This is GB News across the UK, on TV, in your car, on your digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. And now it's back to Michael.
Thank you, Sophia Wensler. To what extent must Britain atone for its imperial history? The government's official position is opposed to reparations for slavery and colonisation. However, a new white paper states that in the provision of foreign aid, Britain should acknowledge its past. To discuss whether past injustices or future needs should determine where Britain's aid money is spent, I'm joined by two historians. Dr. Tessa Dunlop is with me in the studio, and from the University of Leiden we're joined by Jeff Flynn Paul, author of Not Stolen, The Truth About European Colonialism in the New World. Tessa, I've got you here in the studio. Do you perceive here that there has been a change of government policy?
Well, I was very interested by our new Foreign Secretary, Lord Cameron. He said, when looking at the foreign aid budget, which of course we know has much changed since he underpinned it in law, that 0.7% of our GDP should be given to overseas aid. It's now 0.5. But he said that, you know, development aid is tied to a broader moral question. And I think there is no getting away from the sins of our past. You could flip it around and say, why wouldn't you recognise that the legacy of slavery has left us with huge moral questions, it's left generational scars, and there is also, through to today, these structural inequalities, particularly in areas like the Caribbean. And it's also a question that won't go away. We saw this week CARICOM and Africa Union together insisting on global reparations. It's not going to get away, and it's very pertinent for us, of course, with a new king who's head of state in 14 countries, many of which are asking for reparations.
But as so often in politics, there's the question of transparency, because the official position of the government is against reparations, and indeed against apologies, because apologies could lead to demands for reparations. So the king has had to find formulae that he uses when he is touring the Commonwealth, and the government has formulae. But what I think we're now suggesting here is that whilst the official position denies that this is going on, what's actually happening is that we may be directing our aid to those that we think we harmed in the past.
Yeah, and I think that we could be more transparent about this. We could take a lead. We've seen the Dutch government took a lead. They came out and unreservedly apologised for slavery. So did their king. And they've put millions of pounds into educational forums and a museum, but they didn't consult with the impacted communities. And to me, that was to miss a trick. Actually, the way forward is to work with CARICOM, to work with the African Union, to step forward together and look at how we can deal with this and not be afraid, not bundle it as, for example, in Namibia, I believe, Germany's paid a huge amount of money, some £940 million, but they haven't called it reparations. They've called it aid. Arguably, it is reparations. So let's own that, yes, the West, countries with large empires, committed heinous crimes. Germany's also paid a fortune, I think something like $90 billion in reparations, and they call it as such, to Holocaust survivors and descendants. Why can't we do the same when it comes to slavery?
Let's bring in Jeff Finn Paul, who's joining us from Leiden. Jeff, let's go back to the very principle of the matter. What do you make of the argument for reparations that's being made by Commonwealth countries and others?
Well, I mean, that's just it. I think it's really important to look at where the idea of reparations comes from. And remember, in the United States 10 years ago, the idea of reparations was considered a political non-starter. It was dismissed by Barack Obama as racially divisive and nothing more than political theater. And Bernie Sanders was saying the same thing. It was really only a group of radical left activists in the United States, Ta-Nehisi Coates, for example, Ibram Kendi, who brought up these old discredited Malcolm X racially divisive ideas, who started pushing for the idea of reparations. And in an infamous article, Ta-Nehisi Coates accused Bernie Sanders of racism because he didn't support the idea of reparations. Meanwhile, Barack Obama had completely dismissed it during his whole presidency. So this is originally a very radical idea, and it's become mainstream only in the last 10 years. I think we need to be careful before we assume that this is just a normative thing to consider.
Yeah. Why do you think it is? Because I think you do think that it's ill-considered, that it's the wrong thing to do. Why do you think that?
Well, I mean, we have to remember that the UK is one of the major countries which taught the world that slavery is a bad thing. It was normative throughout the world. I mean, people talk about the Africa squadrons helping to abolish slavery, but we forget that as late as the 1920s, in 1927, the UK was instrumental in helping the League of Nations pass a global abolition of slavery, including abolition in Asia, which was very normative up until that time. So it's very ironic if countries come back and blame the UK for the sins of slavery, when in fact the UK helped create the discourse, which slavery was a bad thing. Before that, almost everybody accepted around the world that slavery was normative.
But Jeff, even if this sinner repented, I'm referring to the United Kingdom, was there not sin in the first place? Was there not original sin?
Yes, well, I mean, of course, there was original sin, but the UK spent the 19th century leading the world in abolitionism, forcing abolition on Portugal, forcing it on Africa, and eventually helping to normativize it in Asia. So that original sin is so far in the past, it's really hard to see that structural inequality, for example, which was mentioned earlier, actually can be traced back this many hundreds of years and still have meaning today.
Tessa, one of the issues a lot of people have with this is it is framed in the context of white oppression of blacks, whereas, of course, slavery was a very much broader issue in world history. For example, many black slave traders were involved in getting the slaves down to the coast for the European nations to take over the Atlantic, and for many, I think hundreds of years before that, a slave trade had existed into the Arab countries out of Africa. And I think that is one of the problems that people have with this, that it's being used as a stick to beat white people over the treatment of black people, whereas actually slavery had a much more complex history than that.
It indeed does have a much more complex history and ramifications, and of course present-day slavery, which Theresa May is very strong on. However, I think when we look at it in the context of the British Empire, and just to pick up on what Jeff was saying there, the idea that we were world leaders in pointing out to the world the wrongs of slavery. But let's look at the way in which we did that. In 1834, we abolished slavery. Who do we compensate? The slaves who are freed, so there's a glut of unemployment, there's chaos that persists today. It's arguably why there's high crime rates in some of these Caribbean islands, because actually those men and women freed had nowhere to go and nothing to do, no compensation for their enslavement. Meanwhile, the slave owners were paid vast compensation that we, as a nation, have been paying the debt on until really very recently.
But is there no statute of limitations? Is there no period of time over which after which this ceases to be relevant?
It's an interesting question. Obviously, in English common law, my children won't have to pay for the crimes that I commit. But at the same time, I think we all have to own, and it's particularly visible in our very rich royal family, is that we all profit off the back of Britain's hereditary wealth. We're an enormously rich country, as are most countries who had empires, for example, the Netherlands, Germany, etc. In Europe, also, we were world leaders in the abolition of slavery. So let's also lead here. Let's hold or try and reclaim that moral high ground. I don't believe it would do Britain so much harm. We lobbed 0.2% off our foreign aid budget because apparently we couldn't afford it. Well, inflation's going down. I say let's own this, let's take a lead, and let's at least communicate with the groups that are pushing for reparations.
Thank you very much indeed. Tessa Dunlop and Jeff Finn Hall, who joined us from Leiden. Some breaking news has just come in. The former English footballer and manager Terry Venables has passed away at the age of 80. Mr Venables played for various clubs, including Chelsea, Tottenham Hotspur and Queen's Park Rangers during the 1960s and 1970s. We'll be crossing to the Netherlands after the break as we look at the electoral success of the anti-immigration hardliner Geert Wilders. Is a new populist wave about to break on the continent? Stay with us.
Hello there, I'm Greg Dewhurst and welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast. It's still rather cloudy, staying unsettled over the next few days and temperatures starting to fall further as well. Low pressure dominating the weather pattern at the moment, bringing some brisk winds to eastern areas. This low pressure moves away, allowing brief respite before then further weather systems move in through the middle to end of next week. This evening time, a lot of cloud across the UK, outbreaks of rain, 1 or 2 heavier bursts possible. Temperatures dropping dropping under clear skies across parts of Scotland, a patchy frost here, but showers feeding in from the northeast. Elsewhere, lots of cloud, outbreaks of rain. It will keep temperatures up, so a milder night than of late, generally holding up between 5 and 9 Celsius. But that means England, Wales, Northern Ireland will start off cloudy, outbreaks of rain. This slipping slowly south-eastwards as we go through the day, allowing brighter skies to follow across parts of Northern Ireland, western Scotland, later western fringes of England and Wales. The east staying breezy with showery outbreaks of rain, which could be heavy at times, turning wintry over the higher ground of Scotland. And temperatures dropping as the day goes on, generally into single figures as the winds turn around to a northerly direction. Then into a Tuesday, it's a cold, frosty start, some fog patches first thing, and then a brighter, drier day for many. There will be some wintry showers across the north, and then the next few days, temperatures continue to fall, overnight frost and fog, and the risk of some hill snow too.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Ah!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle. Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new teeth.
It's your new teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Geert Wilders has stalked the Dutch political theatre for decades without making any significant breakthrough. But that changed this week as the charismatic populist, who's known for his tough talk on immigration and Islam, won the highest number of seats in the general election. Whether he'll become Prime Minister is still to be determined, but in the words of the BBC, his victory has spooked Europe. How high can the populist tide rise? To answer that, I'm joined by pollster and political scientist Matt Goodwin. Hello, Matt. Welcome back to GB News. What did you make of Geert Wilders' performance in itself? How well did he do? To what extent was that unexpected?
Well, good morning, Michael. He did very well. It was a surprise for most of the commentariat in the Netherlands. But of course, we should remember that the rise of Geert Wilders has been 20 years in the making. The Dutch have been voting for populists since people like Pim Fortuyn in the early 2000s. They've had a more recent wave of populism in the 2010s. But nothing like this. This is a sort of peak, if you like, for Wilders. And it comes against the backdrop of two things, Michael, which I think are critical. One is an ongoing refugee crisis in Europe, which we still don't have a resolution to. And the second, obviously, is the Israel-Gaza conflict and the protests, the pro-Palestine, in some cases pro-Hamas protests that have been taking place in many European cities. Both of those things, I think, have helped Wilders and have really given him this record result.
Very interesting. Now, do you want to broaden this out to Europe? What are the parallels elsewhere, and can we detect, as it were, a movement, a trend?
Well, I think we can, Michael. I wrote a book in 2018 called National Populism, in which I argued that these movements were going to become permanent players in Western democracies. And that essentially is what we are seeing. Really, for those viewers with long memories, they'll remember people like Jean-Marie Le Pen, they'll remember people like Jörg Haider, they'll remember people like Umberto Bossi. Really, from the 1990s, this movement of national populism, which prioritizes the interests and the culture of the nation against what it argues is a corrupt or self-serving elite, has been gaining strength in most Western democracies. So look around Europe today at the AfD, the Alternative for Germany, the most popular party in Eastern Germany, the most popular party among men, National Populists in Austria back to being at the top of the polls, Giorgia Meloni running Italy, Vox in Spain doing reasonably well, Chega in Portugal breaking through, the Sweden Democrats essentially running Sweden's government from behind the scenes. So these movements are very significant, are very strong, Michael. And, you know, what's interesting about Britain, by the way, is that we are now one of the only democracies in Europe not to have one of these very successful populist movements. And, you know, from where I'm sat, Michael, the thing I would say is what all of this shows is, I think, the failure of established parties to really respond to the concerns that are driving voters into the arms of these parties. I mean, we're nearly 10 years on now from the votes for Brexit, the votes for Donald Trump, you know, and still we've got unresolved public concerns over migration, unresolved public concerns over law and order, unresolved public concerns over what's happening to the cultural left in our politics, which is increasingly radical. And these parties will just keep getting stronger and stronger unless the reasons people are voting for them are actually addressed.
And why then do parties, the established parties on the centre-right in Europe, why do they not respond better? What is holding them back? Why don't they occupy at least part of the ground that is shifting over to these populist parties?
Well, I think we've seen two things going on, really, Michael. The first is parties on the left are basically, in my view at least, incapable of really addressing these concerns over migration and borders and security, because ultimately they view them as being somehow racist, which is really reflecting how far left today's left has gone. But the second thing, I think, which is difficult for the established parties, if we're being honest with viewers and we're being honest with voters, is that they can't control these issues anymore. They've either handed too much power and authority up to organizations like the European Union, or they've outsourced power and authority to regulatory industries and agencies that aren't directly accountable to people. And so they haven't really got that control over those issues that they used to have. And, partly that's been exacerbated, we must remember, by some of the disastrous policies people in power have pursued. I mean, the reality, for example, of our refugee crisis is that that was partly stoked by our disastrous interventions in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in Syria, Libya, our inability to stabilize Northern Africa, our inability to find a political consensus in dealing with that challenge, and deciding what we want to do in terms of defending our borders. So I think overall, the established parties have been struggling for a number of reasons. And so populists, I was just looking at the polling before coming on this show, Michael, populists in a lot of these countries are now getting higher than they've ever been before. I mean, even in the US, we tend to forget this, but Trump is now polling ahead of Joe Biden, ahead of that 24 general election. And we've got a massive set of elections next year, Michael, across all of the European Parliament. We've got we're going to have elections that will determine who represents people in the European Parliament. So that none of this is going anywhere anytime soon unless we can actually address those grievances.
At the beginning of this, you talked about the British exceptionalism, that we don't really have this tendency going on in this country. I suppose we did, but we released the pressure by having the Brexit referendum. So I would argue that actually, if you give people the chance to express themselves, that could be one way in which you can puncture the populist bubble. I'd also suggest that the first-past-the-post system makes it much more difficult for these sorts of parties to gain a foothold.
I think that's right, Michael. I think in the 1950s, there was a very famous book called The Civic Culture by two academics who argued that the reason Britain didn't do extremist radical politics like the Germans and the Italians was that we had a political culture that prioritized things like consensus, tolerance, pluralism. We didn't like messianic figures. We certainly didn't like anybody that seemed to be violating our commitment to democracy. Now, of course, Brexit did, as you say, become an outlet for some of that. What worries me, though, today, Michael, is that while that did release some pressure in the system, as we saw this week with the new migration numbers, I'm concerned about the fact that both Labour and the Conservatives now have sort of decided to put pressure back into the system by not doing what many Brexit voters thought they were going to get when they voted for Brexit, mainly lower levels of migration. We saw those numbers this week. Net migration now 672,000, meaning 672,000 more people came into the country than left. And what worries me, Michael, is that Brexit release valve that you rightly point to. I wanted that to be permanent. I didn't want it just to be for a few years. And what worries me today is that we seem to have leaders who are determined to take us back into that politics of populism and polarization and division by not giving the British people what they want. And lastly, Michael, I polled them this week. I'll give you one figure. When I gave British voters those migration numbers, 54% nationally said these numbers are too high, and over 70% of Conservative voters said these numbers are too high. So there is one little seed that may yet grow into yet another populist rebellion. So watch this space.
Very interesting. Thank you very much, Matt Goodwin, for drawing together all the strands across Europe. In a few minutes, we'll be discussing another populist politician, Javier Milei, who is the president-elect of Argentina, prompted a rebuke from Britain's Defence Secretary with his remarks about the Falkland Islands. We'll be hearing what the islanders think after the news with Sophia Wensler.
It's 12:30. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB newsroom. Reports say the Israel government has received the list of hostages who are expected to be released today. An official told The Times of Israel that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office are notifying the families of those loved ones who are on the list. It is the third day of a 4-day truce, which Qatar says earlier today it hopes will be extended further with the release of more abductees. Meanwhile, smoke can be seen at the Gaza border on the third day of the truce between Israel and Hamas. Hamas confirmed that a total of 340 trucks loaded with aid supplies has entered Gaza through the Rafah crossing since the truce began. 9-year-old Irish-Israeli girl Emily Hand has been reunited with her father following her release by Hamas. She is among 17 hostages released by the terrorist group after 50 days in captivity. 13 Israelis, 6 women and 7 children, along with 4 Thai nationals, were transported out of Gaza through the Rafah border crossing. Video released by Hamas shows women and children being taken into Red Cross vehicles. The IDF says the released hostages are now in Israel and are reuniting with their family while being medically assessed. The Met Police have launched an investigation into a group of protesters who intimidated a GB News political correspondent at a pro-Palestine protest in London. Catherine Forster found shelter after being surrounded by irate demonstrators. In a post on X, the Met Police say the right of the press to freely report on protests is no less important than the right to protest itself. They should be able to do so without facing intimidation or aggression. 18 people were arrested during the pro-Palestine protests in London yesterday. Former England manager Terry Venables has died at the age of 80. His family released a statement saying, "We are totally devastated by the loss of our wonderful husband and father, who passed away peacefully yesterday after a long illness. We would ask that privacy be given at this incredibly sad time to allow us to mourn the loss of this lovely man who we were so lucky to have had in our lives." Venables was in charge of the England men's national team between 1994 and 1996. He was also club manager for clubs Crystal Palace, Tottenham and Barcelona. And you can get more on all those stories by visiting our website at gbnews.com. And now it's back to Michael.
Thank you, Sophia Winsler. Italian prosecutors scored a major success against the mafia this week in a huge trial that led to more than 200 people being convicted and sentenced. The name of the gang may be unfamiliar to outsiders, being neither the notorious Cosa Nostra of Sicily nor the Camorra of Naples. 'Ndrangheta predominates in Calabria, and it has become one of the largest criminal enterprises in the world. Professor Antonio Nicasso is one of the world's foremost experts on the mob, and he explained to GB News how the 'Ndrangheta works.
Is the most extensive, branched and powerful criminal organization in the world, according to Interpol. Is a criminal organization with an estimated turnover of 55 billion euros, much of which comes from cocaine trafficking. This family, the Mancuso family, also invested in England thanks to front companies operating in your country, which is detached from corruption and money laundering operations. Yeah, the 'Ndrangheta is less known compared to the Sicilian mafia, but it's richer, it's more powerful. While the Sicilian mafia was fighting against the state, the 'Ndrangheta invested the money from the kidnapping industry into the cocaine trade. So, but at the same time, even though they are different criminal organizations, they are all well connected to politicians, professionals, businessmen, bankers, public officials. This is the true strength of a mafia or mafia-like criminal organization. And in the case of the 'Ndrangheta is a criminal network, a criminal franchising with branches in over 50 countries worldwide. But a trial alone is not enough to uproot an organization such as the 'Ndrangheta. A comprehensive solution should include freeing territories from fear, investing more money in education, providing jobs and building trust in institutions. Of course, it's important to fight criminal organization, to put together trials against them. But you have to consider that this is one of 150 families operating in Calabria and elsewhere. So it's very difficult because sometimes there is a little bit of a lack of a political will, and sometimes the legislation that Italy used to fight the mafia in Italy are completely different than legislation in other countries. So they always goes where they can invest easily their money, where they face less resistance from the authority.
Fascinating. That was Professor Antonio Nicastro talking about 'Ndrangheta, the mafia in Italy, the section that's based in Calabria. After the break, I'll be opening a bottle of sherry as we discover a novel way to eat the humble mince pie this Christmas.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Ah!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox,
That's right, we want to hear from you,
GB News.
Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Ah!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my new show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m, where real people get to meet those in power and hold them to account. Every week, we'll be hearing your views from up and down the country in the real world. Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. As Christmas approaches and families gather around the dining table, the nation may find itself divided, not over Gaza, Brexit or the culture wars, but over the humble mince pie. Some people love them and others hate them. But I'm joined now by a mince pie evangelist who's found a clever way to convert the sceptics with her mince pie cookies. Chelsea Gazdar, welcome to GB News.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Tell me, first of all, a bit about your career success.
Sure.
You got into catering, what, about 7 years ago or something like that?
Exactly. Blondie's Kitchen was born 7 years ago, and now we find ourselves in Selfridges, in London, in Covent Garden, and we're also online, and we ship across the entire UK. And our mince pie cookie cups take the nation by storm, and we genuinely convert mince pie haters all the time.
So actually, you had a kind of a stall, a kind of what?
We did. We started out on a market stall, and it just snowballed. People loved it. Lots of people found us on social media, and eventually Selfridges found us and asked us to go into their store, which was amazing. And on the back of that, we have been in business ever since, selling millions of cookies.
And tell me about this controversy over mince pies. I did not know that there was one. I've always loved mince pies.
I was about to say, are you a lover or a hater?
No, I'm a lover. I can't imagine how you would have a different point of view.
I think definitely there's lots of different mince pies on the market. Some contain alcohol, some don't. Lots of people, it's a bit like Christmas pudding. Dried fruit with lots of flavour and alcohol can sometimes, you know, be a bit overwhelming. So what we've decided to do is tone it down slightly in our mince pies, which is why even haters enjoy them, because we actually have no alcohol in our dried fruit base, and we make sure that the flavours aren't too overwhelming, and actually, instead of being encased in pastry, we encase ours in cookie dough. So the lovely cookie dough exterior is what gives it that chewy, crunchy, ooey-gooey middle, which you might miss from a traditional mince pie.
But what is this fellow here?
So you're tucking into our mini mince pie cookies, and they evolved because we're constantly evolving and coming up with new ideas to get people excited. And these are basically little bites of heaven. They're chewy, they're crispy, they've got all the flavours of a mince pie. So we use our traditional dried fruit filling in them, but we actually sort of ripple it through the dough so it's not so intense. Have a taste. Let me know what you think.
I will have a taste.
Yeah, so they're lovely and chewy, and then we just dust them with icing sugar so that they've got that extra sweet finish, and they are perfect with a cup of tea or a nice coffee, whereas our mince pie cookie cups are more of a dessert.
Let's do with these first. I mean, this is like a delicious undercooked cookie. So
slightly underbaked, exactly.
Underbaked. And you've taken the alcohol out of this, which I'm afraid is not good news for me. But what I see you've got there is a bottle of sherry.
Absolutely, which
Let's have a go at that.
Pairs lovely with the traditional fruit in the mince pie. That's for you. Don't want to get you too drunk.
Well, I was going to say, keep going. There we go. Thank you very much.
I'll pour some as well.
Just read part of the label to me. Probably shouldn't advertise the brand, but tell what are you drinking?
This is a 12-year-old creamy sherry.
Creamy sherry, right?
Yes,
excellent.
creamy. So it shouldn't be too intense.
Let's just have a look at that bottle. We'll hold that up.
Sure.
Yes, signature 12-year-old cream sherry from Jerez in Spain. Not surprising. Right. Well, it's lovely to see you, Chelsea. Cheers.
You too, cheers.
And happy Christmas.
And to you. We have got our Black Friday sale online at the moment, and the discount ends this evening, and it's BF 20% for 20% off if you want to pre-order for Christmas.
Let's have a go at your more traditional-looking mince pie.
Sure.
And you're going to tell me... Let me reach for one.
Yeah, you reach for one. I'll reach for one.
And let me show it to the viewers. And so the distinction here is that this is Not made of pastry, but of cookie dough.
And I've got some double cream here if you'd like.
Oh, yes. Well, I'm going to break it open to have a look at what it looks... Oh, not sure that was a wise thing to do. There we go. Nice interior. And these are warm, by the way. It's lovely.
Yes, I did warm it up for you.
Mmm. That is nice.
Yeah, would you like some cream? I've got a spoon here for you.
Thank you very much. Oh, Christmas has come early.
Yes, definitely. And we sell these warm, actually, in store with cream or custard.
Are you still in Selfridges?
We are, yes. We're in the food hall.
And you broke some sort of record in Selfridges,
We
didn't you?
did. Well, we were the first pop-up.
The first?
The first pop-up that actually got... apparently, we beat all sales records in history, and they asked us to go back in permanently on the back of being the most successful.
You were serving... At one time, you were serving cookies with milk?
Milk and cookies, yeah, that's how the concept began.
How did that work?
So when we initially started the concept, we thought we can't just do cookies. What can we do it with? Milk and cookies, a simple combination. It's never going anywhere. It's never gone anywhere. Classically goes well together. Who doesn't love milk and cookies? So we started with the milk and cookie concept, and we also developed our own cereal milk. So we did a Cocoa Pop cereal milk, a Frosties cereal milk, and then eventually that launched into wider things such as hot drinks, coffees. Now we don't just do milks.
Well, Chelsea, thank you very much for coming on and for feeding me and for giving me a lovely sherry as well.
No problem.
So how do people get hold of you?
We are at blondieskitchen.co.uk. We ship across the entire UK, or they can come and find us in store at Selfridges or Covent Garden. Which
is marvellous, isn't it? Because, you know, if we were to plunge into another pandemic, you've now got an online feature as well.
Absolutely.
Keep the business going. Thank you so much for bringing me early Christmas cheer. The new president-elect of Argentina, Javier Milei, has wasted no time in provoking a diplomatic spat over the Falkland Islands, calling Buenos Aires' sovereignty over them non-negotiable. He's earned himself an early rebuke from the British government. But what do the islanders think? I'm joined now by Falklands MLA Teslin Barkman, who's in Port Stanley. Teslin, thank you very much for joining us. Are you concerned about how this new presidency is getting underway? In fact, it hasn't even got underway. These are sounds that are being made by the president-elect.
Yes, unfortunately, this is a kind of behaviour we see quite regularly, especially around elections and understanding the popularity of President Milei with his political counterparts. I can understand why he's using the Falklands as an issue to try to unite to form a government. But it is, of course, another example of the brutality that they launch against our country continuously.
When you say brutality, he has specifically ruled out any military effort to take the islands. What is it you refer to as brutality then?
So, as everybody knows, 41 years ago, and I can see that the pictures are being shared, Argentina brought war to our home. My mum, her family, all my friends, my whole country were kind of held captive while their homes were invaded. And as we've seen since then, the UK government stood behind us, stood behind our freedom, acknowledging the shared history that they had with us and the support for our people and for our human rights to decide our own future. And unfortunately, this isn't a concept that's respected across the water. And rather than continue with kind of military brutality, they've continued with an international campaign to get other countries to support their view, to remove our human rights. But they also lobby illegal economic sanctions against us to try to limit our involvement on the international stage and to restrict our economy and to hurt the oceans around us, which is particularly distressing.
I have visited the Falklands. I've had the privilege to do that. And the kind of insight I had when I went there is you're a very small population, but you have to be extraordinarily aware of world affairs. I think of you as a village with a foreign policy because you really have to think about how different governments around the world view you. Do you find the position of Argentina is a daily worry for you? Does it, as it were, affect your quality of life?
Yes, most certainly. So as well as, obviously, we're a small population, as you say, but there is quite a large number of us with post-traumatic stress from the war. I myself was born just after the war, but I had to grow up with minefields, with brutality of a country saying that you don't have a right to exist as a people. And I realise that we are an inconvenient truth to the government of Argentina, but we're not going to be removed. And I suppose what's one of the most distressing things is, even though we are the only people the Falklands has ever had, I have to now pass this burden on to my child, to put up with this idea that we're used as a political pawn, to try to get some votes in Argentina, which is it particularly speaks to the lack of humanity that the government has around human rights. It's just awful.
But since the Falklands War of 1982, the support of the British government is absolutely rock solid, is it not? And so, oddly enough, in that respect, we're in a better position than we were before the war. Before the war, there obviously was a bit of a Foreign Office plot to give away the Falklands, but that certainly isn't what politicians would allow today.
No, certainly, and you've acknowledged there. The Falklands have got a complicated history with the UK. It's certainly not as simple as people assumed it to have been. We were once just a part of that empire that Britain had around the world, but we were too small to stand on our own, and frankly we didn't wish to. We want to acknowledge our history with Britain. We want to continue a relationship that we choose with Britain, and that's what we do now as a UK overseas territory as part of that family. But we have strong cross-party support, and it does pain me a bit when I see particularly the UK media choosing to solely align us with a Conservative government, because of course that was the government that was in power when we were liberated, and so they bring up this association. But we have such strong cross-party support because every MP in the House of Commons, you hope, acknowledges that human rights are important, so they respect the fact that we choose that relationship.
Teslin Barkerman, talking to me from the Falkland Islands. Thank you so much for joining me. Dawn Neeson is taking over in a moment. Would you like a mince pie and a glass of sherry?
I wasn't even waiting to be asked, to be honest. Good afternoon. How the devil are you?
Very well.
Right, yeah, I'm only here, obviously, for the mince pie and the sherry. How wonderful. We haven't got that, but we have got a Doctor Who exclusive. I'm sure you watched it last night?
I didn't.
How do you identify the correct pronouns to use for a giant gonk? It's the question on everybody's lips. We're obviously also live from the anti-Semitism march. We've got Catherine Forster down there covering all of that for us today. We're also talking about the Terry Venables, who we sadly lost today at 80. So we're talking about his amazing football career and how we're going to be remembering him. And some hot gossip from the jungle with our very own Nigel Farage down there.
What gossip could there possibly be about Nigel?
I couldn't possibly say. You will have to stay tuned and find out.
How do you think Nigel has been doing?
I think he's doing very well, actually. I think he's actually entertaining.
Thank you very much. That's all from me today. Thank you very much for Chelsea Gazdar, who's still here. Dawn Neeson will be here in just a few moments. It's been marvellous to have some mince pies and a glass of sherry. I hope you can do the same at home and therefore enjoy the rest of your Sunday. Bye-bye.
Hello there, I'm Greg Dewhurst and welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast. It's still rather cloudy, staying unsettled over the next few days, and temperatures starting to fall further as well. Low pressure dominating the weather pattern at the moment, bringing some brisk winds to eastern areas. This low pressure moves away, allowing brief respite before then further weather systems move in through the middle to end of next week. This evening time, a lot of cloud across the UK, outbreaks of rain, 1 or 2 heavier bursts possible. Temperatures dropping under clear skies across parts of Scotland, a patchy frost here, but showers feeding in from the northeast. Elsewhere, lots of cloud, outbreaks of rain. It will keep temperatures up, so a milder night than of late, generally holding up between 5 and 9 Celsius. But that means England, Wales, Northern Ireland will start off cloudy, outbreaks of rain. This slipping slowly south-eastwards as we go through the day, allowing brighter skies to follow across parts of Northern Ireland, western Scotland, later western fringes of England and Wales. The east staying breezy with showery outbreaks of rain, which could be heavy at times, turning wintry over the higher ground of Scotland. And temperatures dropping as the day goes on, generally into single figures as the winds turn around to a northerly direction. Then into Tuesday, it's a cold, frosty start. Some fog patches first thing, and then a brighter, drier day for many. There will be some wintry showers across the north, and then the next few days temperatures continue to fall, overnight frost and fog, and the risk of some...
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers.